You too.
Likewise, likewise. So, how's the great British weather treating you on a Monday evening?
To be fair, it was quite crummy this morning, but it's actually warmed up quite a bit, and it's okay. It feels fine. I mean, obviously, it's about to get dark, but all in all, it's been good.
That's good because you're in Bristol right now because you're playing for Bristol City Women's.
Yes.
So you're about probably I'd say half an hour away from me. So we're sharing the same kind of climate and weather right now. So
Awesome. Yeah. So you kind of understand where I'm coming from then.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
how's your day been? What's it been looking like?
Yeah, it's been good. So I'm coming back from injury. And so I kind of had back-to-back injuries this season. I had knee surgery back in November, so then I was coming back from that. I was out for about 3 months with it, and then my first game back after obviously being out for so long, I actually ended up tearing my calf, and so I've been out for almost 2 months with that. So today, I actually we had to go into the facility this morning at around 10:30. We had a game yesterday against Tottenham. The girls that played, they had a recovery session. For the ones that didn't, they obviously had a session this morning. And then with me and my rehab, I went out with the girls, did the warm up, did my running, came back inside, finished my stuff, and that was it. Came home, just relaxed, and now I'm on the podcast. So yeah, it's been a very chill day, honestly.
Well, that's good that you've been able to have that time with the girls and being integrated part of that. And
Yeah,
because sometimes when players have injuries, they can sort of then be trained on their own. It can be part of a much smaller group and then withdrawn from a squad. So it's
yeah.
good that you've had that contact time, which I think is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think having back-to-back injuries has been difficult for me because I do feel like for the better part of almost 5 months, I've been removed from the girls for a really long time, and obviously when I was coming back from my knee, I did get integrated back into things, and that was nice. You kind of feel like a part of your team, but injuries, they're a weird situation. You do kind of feel like you aren't a part of the team. You don't feel like you're a part of what's going on, and it can be difficult. I think trying to maintain that and you know, maintain your mental being can be difficult sometimes when you don't feel like you are a part of everything. And for me, that's one thing I've been having to juggle with the most for the last few months, and it's been tough. But thankfully, I have a really good support system, and they've been keeping me going.
And it's good that you've got that support system and you touch upon that mental well-being there and that impact that it can have. So for you across the course of your career, say you've been playing from 14 years of age to the
Mhm.
age of 30, which you are now, that's a long span of 16 years.
Yeah,
And realistically, to still have good health at 30 and be playing at a very good standard of football
right,
is obviously the key and the aspiration to currently have right now and maintain.
right.
But over the course of your career and the way that you've been playing, have you been impacted much by injuries then, or?
No, surprisingly, this is like the first time where I've had like significant injuries that have kept me out for a significant amount of time. I've been blessed and thankful, in a good position where I haven't had to deal with many crazy injuries throughout, especially my professional career, and I think you see a lot more happening in professional careers and in terms of injury. And I've been really blessed to not have anything significant. So it's been really good. But I've had a couple things here and there. I broke my foot a few years back. The same knee surgery I had back in November, I had it once before when I was playing for Liverpool. So it's like little things like that. But for the most part, I haven't had anything substantial enough where it's removed me for, a season long sort of injury. So I can't complain too much about it. But this is probably the one time where I've had, back to back stints where I have been out, for a substantial amount of time with both injuries. And it's new to me, because I'm explaining that it's never really happened. So it does seem a bit foreign. I was having a conversation with my mom when I had torn my calf, and she was like, considering all things, albeit you've gone through the better part of 10 years not having any substantial crazy injuries, it was bound to happen at some point, and it just happens to happen right now, and I'm a bit older, things don't really move and work and recover the same way that they used to. So, it's to be expected. But I've been in a really good place, for the last 10 years where I haven't had to deal with anything too crazy. So I'll take this one moment and ride with it. And hopefully this is it, and I won't have to deal with it again.
And hopefully that you don't. And in terms of that, ballpark sort of looking at the next few years to the future, then considering you're 30, which is still very young mind, and I'll always argue that for every footballer who plays, some people see that as a turning point towards, well, what does the next sort of few years look
Right.
like? Because in terms of professional football, it starts to slow down a little bit, and hopefully, touch wood and all the grace with you, that it doesn't happen that way, and you can play for as long as that you choose to. But now
Yeah.
you're at this sort of age, is there a scope of how many years you're sort of wanting to play for?
Yeah, it's a never ending question that I have with myself. Like you said, the minute you hit 30, it's like, okay, what you start thinking about what is next. And I think I had been starting to think about what is next since I was about 27. But for me, I think it really is just enjoying it as much as for as long as possible. I don't know. I say I give myself until 32 to really be done with it, but I say that and then it may very well not happen. So right now it's just about one, first and foremost, recovering. And then secondly, when I do kind of get back into the swing of things, seeing where my mind is at mentally, because I think one thing about football, for as long as I've played it, and probably along with a lot of my colleagues, you when you're in an environment like this for so long, you can't help but think what is next, and that has been forever. That's the thing that's constantly going on in my mind now, especially now that I'm a bit older. I don't want to put a time frame on it. I just want to continue to keep enjoying it while I can. It's still very much a passion of mine. But of course I have been thinking about life after. I do have passions outside of football that I'm really excited and interested to get into. um once football is over. It's just, right now I'm trying to stay present in the present and enjoy football while I can, because it's very rare to have an opportunity like this and get to do what I love and get paid for it and be on the professional level. But of course, it's a never ending thought in my head about what is next. How I'm going to get there. What are the steps that I have to take now? But rest assured, I am taking all the steps right now to make sure that transition into the next phase of my life, once I'm done playing, is as smooth as possible.
And there's a couple of things within that, because you look at, say, 32, that's only a 2 year gap between now and within returning for that
Right.
2 year period from an injury. So it'll take a little bit of time pre season.
Right.
That 2 years is a very minimal amount of time when it comes to actual contact of playing football and what
Right.
might actually be involved in that. And then the second part of that is, when you start considering what is next and looking at this part of life, whether you're a professional footballer or not,
Mhm.
that's a very deep question which you can always ask yourself, and can provide a lot of mental magnitude around that,
Right.
because you're always going, what's next? How am I getting there? What's the strategy? How much time do I have to commit to this? And that can be a big sort of ask and commitment from yourself, whether you're a professional or not a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting you said that because right now, like the steps that I'm taking right now, I'll give you an example. I'm a part of this program called the Second Half that's been put on by Visa. Players like Kim Little, Karen Carney are co-founders of it. And basically what it is, it's a program to help players within the Super League. Anybody's free to join, to really kind of understand and kind of get a little bit of a better understanding of what other passions they may have outside of football to kind of help them transition into life after. And it's every week. And really and truly what happens is we are on a call and there's presenters and from certain companies, and they kind of give us a lowdown and a breakdown of certain things. And it really is great to be a part of a program like this because I think it gets your mind thinking about, oh, you know what, hey, maybe this is something that I'm interested in. Thankfully for me, going into this program, I have an idea as to like what it is that I want to do once I'm done playing. It's just about the stepping stones, who I can bring into my corner, who I can bring into my network to make sure that transition is as smooth as possible. But I think it's you speak to players, and not just in this sport, but any sport across the board. Um, you speak to athletes and you ask them, oh, like what do you want to do after you're done playing? And I'll tell you, a lot of the time, a lot of these athletes don't have a single clue as to what the heck they want to do, and it's scary. It can be quite terrifying. Um, and that's why I'm thankful that I went to uni and I got a chance to kind of experience life and kind of figure out what it is that I like to do outside of football to kind of help navigate that life after. Um, but like you said, it could be quite time consuming within itself to kind of figure out what it is that you want to do. And I think it can also be a quite daunting thing to do as well because you some people just genuinely don't know. For most people, their sport is all that they've ever known. But what's so great about our sports and being an athlete is we are so much more than athlete. We're so much more than being an athlete. And I think sometimes we have to understand that in order to figure out what it is that we like to do outside of our sports. But that's a whole other conversation.
I love that though, and I love that you are more than an athlete because that's a big part of every conversation that I have with every professional on here is unearthing what is, perceived to be a professional footballer and having that conversation. So
Right.
you are much more than a person. So when you talk about that consideration, and as we open up the conversation much more, it's looking at the mental side beyond and after football, current
Mhm.
return from injury and how that's looked, how you got into football, that's lifespan of football. So already within the first 10 minutes, we've looked at four types of different topics which were in that. And some
Right.
people don't consider that. They might just consider the match that you played yesterday, and then it's suddenly on to next week and the match that you're going to play then. And
Right.
that's why you look at that short time frame and look at the actual maximization of football and contact in the time that you are, alive for. And that is again very minimal. So everything else around that, the majority is the person, the life that we live. And that
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be considered in the actual respect of the time frame which is put on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes as outsiders looking in, they look at athletes and think, oh, like you said, it's just focusing on that game and then that's it, moving on to the next game. But little do a lot of people know that there's so much in between that goes on. I think some of the girls that I play with have interest, are doing things outside of football, essentially preparing themselves for life after. You have girls that, are starting their own businesses and there's so much else going on, but when people look at us and they think, oh, they're athletes, they're robots, we're so much more than that. um I think that's been such a big topic of discussion lately. There's been, especially in the states, I know LeBron James has, I think this is it a podcast or it's something, he speaks about more than an athlete. And I think so much time, I think athletes are the world has I was thinking about this the other day actually. The world has done such a good job at convincing us as athletes that the only thing that we know is our sport. And the reality is that we are so much more than that. And I feel like when the world convinces us of that, we then start to kind of feed into it and we start to think, oh man, if this is taken away from me, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what life looks like outside of that. And the truth of the matter is we're so much more than that. This Our sports, whether it's football, basketball, hockey, whatever it may be, the fact of the matter is that our sports have equipped us in more ways than we even know, and we've experienced things that a lot of people will never get a chance to experience in this lifetime that can help equip us for what is to come next. But the world has done such a great job at convincing us as athletes that all we know is our sport and it's all you've ever done. So they question, oh, are you going to be able to handle it? Are you going to be able to do this? Are you going to be able to do that? Once you're done with your sport. And the truth of the matter is like, yeah, more than likely we're probably going to succeed more than we probably think. It's just having that understanding, and I think recognizing from early o'clock that what is it that I have a passion for? What is it that I'm interested in? What is it away from football or within football that can kind of help elevate me in a way that once I'm done playing, it can transition into the next phase of my life. And I think I've been doing that since I was about 25. And I think I'm in a good place now where, if I was to retire tomorrow, I would hope that next phase would be as smooth as possible. But it's crazy how the world just convinces us as athletes that this is all we know, this is all we've ever done, and we don't know anything different. And the truth is we do. And I like to just put that on the record that we do. And we're so much more than what you see displayed on a pitch every Sunday. There's so much more going in throughout the weeks. There's more going on in our personal lives than people recognize. And that's just a reality of a professional athlete, honestly.
I really like the way that you do frame that because that's such an interesting perspective. Whereby, out of everyone that I've spoken to on the Q&A series, has never ever brought up that perspective or that insight towards that perception towards what an athlete is and how that world has convinced them around that, and
Yeah,
therefore how people might not have that understanding of them as a person and
yeah.
how that may look in and out of their lives as well as on and off the pitch, and how the big impacts can really play in. So you say that your career could end tomorrow straight away, and touch wood that it doesn't again, but it could be where it's really good because the girls have got got experiences and they have opportunities as their own businesses, as you say. And it can
Right.
be such a seamless transition whereby, do you know what, football actually doesn't matter tomorrow because they're in a position where they got their own business to focus on. And it's not going to be so much
Exactly.
heartbreak for them. Or, for example, if one of them was caught pregnant, suddenly the contract is up in a year's time and pregnancy is a 9-month period. A
Right.
club might be considering, well, actually, we've got a 23-year-old here. We might want to allocate our funding towards them for 2 years, and therefore we're not going to offer a contract to the player returning from maternity, etc. And
Right.
therefore, for that player, they're at an impact whereby they could be really impacted by football by not having a contract to come back to, or other clubs might not see them as in form or fitness. And
Right.
therefore, if they've got their own business, they have that transition for their own life, their own stability. And that
Exactly.
is something which, again, is another key consideration within that as well. So there's so much which really plays into football, how that looks, the ideology around that perception of footballers, their own personal lives, that transitions beyond and after football, that future planning, being within the moment itself. There's so
Right.
much which unravels as you unwrap each layer of it within each conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is it. I think it's a never-ending conversation. That's one thing that I'm understanding right now, that it's never ending. I think it's a constant conversation that to have about athletes, about professional sports, about life outside of it, life in it, and passions within it, passion outside of it, and understanding where people are from, because we're all different. And the truth of the matter is, playing here at Bristol, the average age is maybe about 20 to 23. It's a relatively young team. So if you would probably ask a lot of these girls on this team, what they want to do after they're done playing, a lot of them probably won't have an answer for you, because for the most part, 97% of them are in the very early stages of their career. But one thing that I've been a huge advocate for, in terms of understanding who you are as a person, as a player, is figuring out who you are without football. I think once you but I think it's important to kind of figure out that while you're playing, because if you don't, I think it'll be hard trying to navigate that once you're done. And I feel as though it's an imperative part of growth and understanding who you are as an individual in order to kind of figure that out. If I could go back to 18, 19-year-old me, and have a conversation, I would say, kind of figure out who you are as a person now. So you, as you continue to keep growing older, and continue to keep evolving as a person, you have a better understanding of what it is that as who you are and who you want to be, essentially, once you're done playing. How people will remember you when you're done playing. It's that character development, I think, is so imperative in your career, that I think is truly, it's a focal point, in any athlete, to figure out who you are as a person, your character. Because at the end of the day, it's all fine and dandy, how people remember you as a player and whatever. But I think the most important thing is how they remember you as it's your character, and understanding like who you are. But that comes from within. I think it's better to figure that out early rather than later. And I think I'm a huge advocate for that, because the one thing about football, and one thing about being a professional athlete, is you will truly understand who you are throughout your sport. I think the character comes to surface, in your sport, when things are going good, when things are going bad, and everything in between. But I think it's recognizing and understanding who you are, that I think essentially is like so imperative to evolving as a person, as a player.
So many interesting points within that as you speak about. So, who you are without football, I think, is such a key question, which is to really ask. And I think if you were to deliver that to many sort of players and ask them how many times has this been asked of you towards your football scholarship or being a professional footballer or life
Right.
as a pro, how many of them would say yes, they have been asked that, and therefore the proportion might actually be really low. So therefore, they're not actually being supported or educated in terms of preparing for life after football. They're
Right.
not being prepared for who they truly are around football, because
Mhm.
all they might seem to do is train, 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 game, 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 commitment,
Yeah.
commitment, commitment. Suddenly
Exactly.
they might be on injury, like yourself, for example, and therefore they're not training as much. It might be on rehabilitation, recovery time, and
Right.
therefore they're not on the field because they can't be on the field. They might just have some gym sessions to do, and therefore they might be able to have that, sort of opportunity to be away from the pitch, or they are away from the pitch more than they want to be.
Mhm.
And within that, there's then really struggling because they don't really understand what the positioning is of oh, I've actually got all this time and I've never had this time before because it's always been about training, it's always been about this.
Right.
And therefore
Right.
they're at a loss within their lives, and therefore their motivation can be impacted, their mental health, everything else that comes into play. So I
Yeah.
think that's such a key question in terms of how you frame that and put that together. And I love what you say in terms of what you want to be remembered that after football, or maybe that perception after football.
Yeah.
And that leads to one of my later on questions in the quick fire round, which you seem to
Okay.
have answered already. So big kudos on that. But I think it's such an interesting perception when you sort of frame it in the way that you have. But there's one key question, which, as you were saying all of that, where do you think this elite mindset which you have, and the way that has come across to me is an elite mindset mind, has come from? Have you been influenced? Is it more towards education? What do you think has framed and shaped that?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think education, most definitely, but I think experience most im is probably the biggest thing, and then, obviously, I think the people that I'm surrounded by kind of help me understand things a little bit more, but I think it's experience, because one thing about being a professional athlete is there's gonna be good days, there's gonna be bad days. And there's no doubt that will at some point face adversity. I mean, I'm facing it now. And it's for me, it's how you come out of the adversity that you're facing. So I think the reason why I have the mindset that I have is because I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm constantly at a low. You know, sometimes, like, coming back from injury, it's already a low situation as it is. But I kind of want to flip the narrative on that and kind of shift my mindset into thinking more positively. And I think the reason why I think the way that I think is because I've been through so much, I've seen so much, and I think it's helped me kind of shape the way that I kind of view life and sport and everything around me as I do. But I think education is a big part of it. Going to the university that I went to and having the coach that I had when I was there, he was a huge, huge advocate on not just developing us as players, but more importantly as human beings. If there was one thing I could take from the University of North Carolina, from UNC women's soccer program, is Anson Dorn's mindset on developing us as not just better players, but even better humans. And I think being a part of that program for 4 years, it doesn't just end when you leave after the 40 years. It carries on to you for the rest of your life. And I think that's how I essentially have gone about life. It's the things that I've learned while I was in college. And then on top of that, learning about the things that I've learned throughout my 10 years of playing professionally, it kind of helps me kind of like shift my mindset on a lot of things. And I think that's how I've been able to kind of have this mindset and maintain it for as long as I have. Um, for me, it's never, I play the sport because I love it, and the biggest thing for me is helping to influence the next generation to be the best versions of themselves, not just as a player, but as a human being. We don't need the next LeBron James, Serena Williams, or, Mia Hamm. We need the next of these individuals who are trying to be the best version of themselves into this world. And that's the sort of influence that I'm trying to leave and the legacy that I'm trying to leave once I'm done. And, once I'm long and gone. And that for me is where my mindset comes from, is the sort of impact that I want to leave once I'm done. So that's the biggest thing.
Again, really interesting that you talk about legacy impact and shaping the next generation, because it is such an impact that maybe players don't feature or look to feature that within their careers, and they look at them as their own individuals and
Correct.
trying to be selfish within doing that. And there's nothing wrong within that, because as
Yeah.
you say, you're only a professional footballer for a small amount of time that it might be, or
Right.
you're only in this moment once in your life, and in 10 years you never get to time travel back and to experience this all over again. So
Right.
you really do have to be selfish within that moment as well. But when you talk about legacy, I think you're always looking at that big picture there and what you're always wanting to on the pitch. And that can be one of
Right.
your motivational factors as to why you get back from injury. Because rather than it going, right, I want to get back, I want to play so many amount of games, I want to help the girls, try and, improve our league position next year. It could be like, actually, I want to leave the legacy to show the impact towards what, the amount of females which are coming through the game from this geographical area in the US could be. I want to go back and talk to them about how my transition from the US to the UK came about and how that played in. There's so many elements which could really shape that in terms of that legacy, whereby there's so many different groups you could talk to, and those different impacts in terms of how you can influence futures and influence the players which are going to come through in the future. And
Absolutely.
whilst you experience this as a footballer now, and as you're looking at that legacy, do you think it's even more pressure for you in terms of how the current world and the current format of football is changing for female players? There's even more pressure for the current cohort of players currently existing to create a next generation.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's crazy to see how much women's football has evolved in the last 10 years. From when I first came to England in 2015 to seeing like where it is right now in March of 2024 is insane. But now I think that standard of how you carry yourself both on and off the pitch is as high as it is with men's football. You see how a lot of players like Mary Earps and Leah Williamson and a lot of these England Lionesses players that when they're walking around, they're not just normal people anymore. It's a different breed, and so you have to act accordingly. That's my, I've always thought that. Be able to handle the pressure, handle the fame, the stardom. There is pressure with it, but I think the beautiful thing about seeing the evolution of women's football, a lot of these women now have been a part of it for years. So I think they'll be able to handle it with no worries. It's just now being able to carry yourself in a way that people will always remember you, not just for the player that you are, but for the person that you are, how you treat them, how you treat fans, how you, how you give back, the sort of community, outreach that people, that players do. I think all of it kind of ties into just the evolution of how women's football is, and you see just kind of where it's going, where it was and where it's going. But in terms of pressure and being able to handle it, I think there should be no pressure. It's enjoying what you're doing and um, getting the mission for it, and and understanding that you've worked your tail off to get to this point in your life and to get to this point in your career. Handle it with care, and be able to know when to switch on, switch off, when you get a chance. But it's incredible just to see how far it's come. And you see girls like yesterday at the game, and girls had the signs, fans had signs of the girls that were playing, and it was incredible to see. And I'm just hoping that that trajectory in terms of like where women's football is going, it will continue to keep bringing more and more, I guess, let's quote, pressure to these players to be able to act accordingly with what comes with it. But it's, if you were to ask me this 10 years ago, would I have remotely, imagined what women's football is now? No, but it's so wonderful to see where it is, and I just think that it's gonna continue to keep going up and up, and I think as it continues to keep, going in the right direction, more and more girls will just know how to, to be able to handle it, and be able to handle it with care, like I say, and be able to just go about it as if it's just another day.
I love that, and I love that you talk about that evolution and that sort of contrast between from 2015 to 2024 and how that looks, and again how that may look in another 10 years beyond that, especially for the generation which are coming through and how that plays in. And right now, a big part of women's soccer is how that doesn't look in terms of how the pressures look in terms of how they're paid less than men, all the other contemporary issues in terms of that those contracts and that evolution of it. So when I touched upon maternity leave earlier, that might have been something that wasn't considered maybe 10 years ago, but is now being considered to give players protection. And I love what you talked about there in terms of that group which is established in terms of those names which come through about how to prepare for life after soccer. And that's another contemporary issue within that. And there are all sort of issues which are evolving the game and opening up topics which are really important. But whilst you're looking at the next 10 years and that evolution, whilst you're in the here and now, do you think there's a little bit of unfairness towards what you might not experience in terms of what the players might experience in 10 years, for example?
Oh, I'm already seeing it now, honestly. And I'm experiencing it now. Being a part of that trailblazing group that, fought for equal pay and, and all that stuff. I'm like on that back end of it now where I'm seeing the growth of it, but not really getting a taste of it.
Mm,
And it does, it's bittersweet because yes, 21-year-old me when I became a pro wanted to see this happen, and I'm so glad that it is. But it's like you see it and you want a taste of it. But in 10 years time, I think girls will be getting paid significantly more, and I will look back on it and think, man, I wish I was a part of that. I wish, that I got a taste of that. But I'm hoping whatever it is I transition into next, I'll be getting paid just as much. But all jokes aside, I think, I'm seeing it right now. I'm experiencing it right now, and it's bittersweet, because as proud as I am of being a part of a group and a generation that fought, day and night to make sure this next generation didn't go through what we went through. I couldn't be anything but more proud of myself to be a part of that. However, I do want the fruits of my labor. I think anybody would, but from it's not all about that right now. It's about making sure that we continue to keep seeing women's football continue to keep evolve over and over and over again, and continuously to make sure that nobody ever has to kind of it never has to get back to where it was when I first started playing 10 years ago.
mm.
Um, but yeah, it's bittersweet. You love seeing it, but of course you want a taste of it. You want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to be a part of a trailblazing group that made sure this was never the case for generations to come. But you also want to be a part of those generations to come that are getting a taste of it. So you can't, beggars can't be choosers. You can't win them all. But I am so proud to be a part of a generation that made sure like the next generation doesn't have to go through this ever again. And it's great to see.
And there's two parts towards that because again, there's enjoying where you are in here and now and being part of this generation, which you're really proud of, and seeing how that evolution has changed and being in a really good place compared to where it was 10 years ago, for example. But then some of the players that I talk to or might have up and coming, and just looking to put dates in, they played the game in perhaps the 90s. And when they played the game in the 90s, it's very unfair that they might not have played the game in the here and now, which you're experiencing, because the game for
Right.
them has evolved so much that it was a great opportunity for them to play now if they were at your age, for example.
Right.
However, it's a little bit unfair that they're not part of that, but that's just life and evolution as it comes around. But it's also amazing that they can look back and go, do you know what? We were actually some of the first female players that played for this club back in the 1990s. We were the players who put in the foundations. So even though you can look and go, actually, I wish I played in the here and now, you can always look back with that fondness and that pride, whereby you actually enjoy the moment when you can look back upon it and going, actually, we were part of the
Absolutely.
1990s, we were part of the 2010s, we were part of the 2020s, and you can be very proud of what you've achieved in each of those moments, despite what the contemporary issues might be or the barriers that may be
Absolutely.
in place as it continues to evolve and move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you make such a great point, and, as I was saying it, I did think about the generations before mine that wanted to make sure my generation didn't have to go through what they went through because they went through even worse than what we did. So, I think it's a constant fight, generations after generations after generations are gonna constantly have to keep fighting for the next generations, you know what I mean? And I think seeing what, the generation that you speak of, the ones that back in the 1990s, they fought for us. They made sure that we didn't have to have the same sort of circumstances that they had, which is incredible. Thinking like looking back at it now, they probably envied what I got a chance to do when I started playing professionally. You know what I mean? And but of course they're proud to have been a part of an era where they made sure, we fought and now they have what they have. So I think it's it's it'll be continuous. I think generation after generation will continuously keep fighting, just to make sure women's football is at that same level where men's is. I don't know how long that's going to take. It may take forever, but I think at some point it will eventually get there. And past generations will look and, like myself, be proud of the fight that they put up to make sure the next group have the best of it. And I think that's just a constant conversation and a constant battle that will continue to keep happening.
Absolutely, for sure. And whilst we've covered so much within half an hour of conversation, and we've jumped right into it, and you've actually taken the conversation into such a great place. It's been great to sort of cover so many different topics and a range of it within that half an hour period. But just to roll back a little bit and to take us back to where we might have been at an introduction, I just want to look at when from that transition from the US to the UK, how that move to Liverpool came about, and just sort of taking us through the career and how it started to where it is now.
Yeah, so I was obviously born in the States, but my dad is Jamaican and my mom is she's born in England, but she grew up in the Caribbean. So I don't know how to pronounce like say it like tri-citizenship. I don't know how to explain it. So I have a American passport, I have a British one, and then I have a Jamaican one. Um, so coming through the US, obviously being born and raised in the US, I was born in 93. So I grew up watching the 99ers. So like Mia Hamm, Julie Foudy, Sidney Parlow, all of the greats from the US women's national team. And of course, I had ambitions to play for the US women's national team. I was born in America, raised in America. I wanted to play for my home country. But interestingly enough, I actually never got a call up to any youth camps ever in my entire time. And I always thought I was good enough. Um, but hey, it is what it is. And so that was that. Anyway, I ended up going to the University of North Carolina, which is a huge, women's soccer powerhouse in the US. And going there was the best decision I could have ever made in my career because not only like I mentioned earlier, not just like developing as a player and becoming the best version of myself as a player, but I became honestly the best version of myself throughout my 4 years there. And it's great to have played under Antidorus and Bill Palladino, and Chris Ducar, and kind of form into the player that I am. Anyway, that's a bit of a backstory. How I got to England. So I throughout my throughout my junior year, Anson was, like, really adamant about I think he kinda figured that I was never gonna get called to the national team, so he kinda wanted me to take a little bit of a different route, and he had asked me one day, he's like, "Satara, your mom is English, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you have a British passport?" And I was like, "I do, actually." Um, and so he was like, "Have you ever thought about, playing in England?" I'll be honest with you, there was never really an ambition to play professionally, and I'll tell you why. Women's professional women's soccer in the US, it was like a roller coaster. It was very tumultuous. You had major leagues that drew such great talent from across the world, but they folded. And when I was going into my sophomore year at UNC, the NWSL was just beginning. It was like the first year of it. And so it was in its infantile stages. So I wasn't 100% sold on playing professionally because I didn't know if there was anything that I could get out of it, honestly. I didn't know where the pay would be like. It never really crossed my mind. Um, so when Anderson had brought up England, I guess nothing in me thought about playing overseas. You know how they like to say Americans, never really leave America. But it never crossed my mind until Anson had said it. So I spoke to my mom and I said, Anson is kind of thinking about me playing overseas in England, like, what are your thoughts? She obviously jumped on it and loved it. And the main reason for that was so I can get a look into for the Lionesses. And so um I thought, okay, if that's the route I should go. And obviously the only way to really get a good look at that time was playing in the Super League. So it wasn't until my senior year, like midway through my senior year, Matt Beard, who was the manager at Liverpool at the time, um, he reached out. I don't know, Anson had connections all over, and Matt reached out and offered me a contract, and then and it made it easy for me to hop over here because with my passport. And the mission was to come over here and get the exposure for the national team. And that's essentially what happened. I think within like the first like 3 4 weeks I was playing for Liverpool, I ended up getting a call up to the U23s with England. We had a tournament in La Manga, Spain, and that was my first camp ever. And it was nerve-wracking. It was, but I realized very quickly that I didn't belong because all the girls that came through that system had come from the very early youth stages. And here I was, this American that stuck out like a sore thumb. I didn't feel like I belonged in the slightest, and I never really opened up with people about that because that was my mom's ambition for me. So, she wanted it, so I wanted it. Anson wanted it, I wanted it. So that was the whole big thing. I don't think I really ever had like a proper say in what it is that I wanted. At the end of the day, I wanted to play for the US and it just wasn't happening. Um, and so I had my first camp with England, and it was enjoyable for the most part. I played with a lot of the girls who are now with the seniors for England, and it was really cool. And so that's kind of how it all came about. But I'll be honest, I struggled my first year at Liverpool. That transition from American soccer to English football is insane. There's obviously a lot more of an emphasis with athleticism and physicality in the US. And then you come over here and it's a very much more tight-knit, technical, very tactical way of playing out here. Girls are very sophisticated on and off the ball. And I'll be honest, it was like getting hit by a truck my first year out here. I had to transition just like anyone else. But after my first year, I kind of settled in, and then I love England, and I haven't been able to stay away since. So, but yeah, that's how it all came about me heading to Liverpool.
Such an interesting story, and especially how you frame that and put that in. And there's so many different points which I want to cover within this conversation that you've touched upon there, and we'll get to them as it continues to evolve. But as you said there, you were never called up to the US national teams, but you always felt that you were good enough. And
Yeah,
when you look back in terms of your college and university experiences and how that all came to play, and that experience which you do have behind you, it is a real depth of experience that you do have, and a fantastic, CV when you look back on any American player which comes through the system. So I'm a huge, huge fan of the US system and how that plays. And every sort of player which I've had on the Q&A series, every time I've looked into their background and they've come from the US game, it's amazing in terms of how much information is readily available and what they're able to achieve at college level.
yeah,
So I'm a
yeah.
huge, huge fan of that myself. But when you said that you felt that you were good enough to be called up and wasn't, why do you think the reasons were that you weren't called up then?
Oh man, politics. I like to think it was politics. So I don't really I know you probably know a little bit about like how the US system is. Well, obviously as I was growing up, there was a thing called the Olympic Development Program, ODP for short, and everybody took part of it. The girls that I played with at club soccer, they all took part of it. It cost a lot of money, and I come from a single parent household where my mom couldn't afford that. So I genuinely couldn't, take part in these ODP camps, whatever. And I always thought that I didn't necessarily need ODP to be successful in my collegiate career. And turns out I didn't. But I think not going through that whole system, it's what kind of set me back. The same excuse that I constantly heard growing up from when I was like maybe 8 to I mean, I still kind of hear it to this day, but it was just like my technical ability. Oh, Satara, you're not technical enough, and this, that, and the third. And it got to a point where I think I stopped really giving a care in the world when I got to college because I was at UNC. I made it this far. I know I was good enough. I became a 4-year starter, I became an All-American at UNC. So I knew that I was good enough. But I think it's the political side of it where, if you aren't a part of the system from like the ODP stages, the likelihood, because they always say from the ODP stages is kind of where you kind of get that looking into for youth national team camps. And it never made sense to me because I thought the talent enough should stand by itself. That was my whole philosophy on it. But that's just not how it worked, and it never made sense to me. Even one of my assistant coaches at UNC when he found out I was going to Liverpool, to try to get a look in with the English national team, he was baffled. He was honestly baffled. I think the last words he said to me before I left was, "I still don't understand how you haven't been called up to the U.S. women's national team," and that was that. So, it's a hard thing to. It was a hard thing at the time to grasp because, of course, growing up, seeing them play, you want to be a part of that. That's what you're hungry for. But I stopped caring in college. It was about having fun in college and, winning a national championship, which I did, and then kind of getting some, individual accolades, which I did, and just having fun with it. But it was a bit demoralizing, from like 14, 15 16, 17 years old, not getting that opportunity. And so I just think just politics just played a huge part of it. And that was just that. And it sucked. But yeah, at the end of the day, I can't complain. I've had a great career. And it's been fun. And for me, that's what matters the most.
And I think you say it there in terms of that's what matters most is fun, and then that opportunity or a point where you said, "I don't care about this anymore," and then you were able to get those individual accolades. You were able to experience what it was in that moment. And you know what? In the long term, without having the foresight to jump into the future and actually see where your career would be now, it's
Mhm.
actually probably done a really good thing for you by not caring, because you look at the career
Yeah.
that you have had. That jump to Liverpool, wow, what an amazing move to have for
Yeah.
Liverpool for one. The National Women's League in the UK, which is a top league, especially at that time, especially as it was growing and Liverpool were a powerhouse and
Right.
still are, but at that initial period. And to look at an American jumping from the US to the UK to such a big club like Liverpool is not
Mhm.
something which is always seen by every player. And then to
Right.
get called up by England under 23s, despite the fact that you say that you felt that you didn't belong, is still an amazing achievement to be recognised, especially when the US national team didn't look at calling you up. Then
Right.
another national team did. So it's actually led to you having some success without them perhaps being that realization at a young age of 14, 15. But what an impact that it might have had at a 14, 15-year old, as you say, in terms of that demoralization and how that fits in, how that political side plays in. So as many listen to this, some people might not consider that there might be politics in football, but there actually is a huge factor within that. But the biggest point or one of the key areas that I'd want to explore there is that sense of belonging for England under 23s, because
Yeah.
some people might say, do you know what? Actually, I could say it because you've got two fantastic opportunities. You've got USA and England, two of the
Mhm.
biggest powerhouses in women's football on the national level, and you've
Yeah.
sort of got a bit of a pick between both. And if you get called up to England and it might not materialise, but you're on the bench, you don't come off and say a friendly, etc. The US national team might be going, oh, actually, she's actually available for us, so why don't we call her up? So it could open up another door if that was ever the position. But for you to not have that sense of belonging and maybe withdrawing yourself mentally from that because you've never grown up in England, you've just come across to Liverpool, you've been called up to a national team. It'd be the same for you if you were in the US and then you had a British player come across in that position where they could be called up to the US national team and be like, well, actually, they don't belong here because they're not competed at the grassroots levels, the youth levels, which we've competed at as national players. But realistically, you do have that sense whereby you do belong because your mum was born in London. She has that British, inheritance that is passed on to you. And what you actually have is you were just born in a different country, but you're still eligible to play for England.
Right.
And I don't think that puts you at a disadvantage or puts you in a position whereby that you don't have that opportunity of belonging or you should take yourself out of it because of it, because you're still deserving of the opportunity to do so, even if you weren't born here or not, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think first and foremost, thank you. Because I guess at the time I didn't realize it. I had just come over here to the UK, and I was probably 3 weeks, maybe a month in tops living in England. And I think I was just adjusting to all of it. I had left everything that I was familiarized with back home in the US, my friends, my family, everything. And so coming into a new environment with girls that I didn't even know. Two of my teammates from Liverpool got called up to that camp with me, but then I don't really see them throughout the entire camp, believe it or not. Barely spoke to them, and I think it was just like feeling like a sense of belonging just wasn't there. And so, I just felt as if I was just a new kid, and I wanted to, I so badly wanted to prove that I'm like the rest of them. But the reality of it all is that they had something a little bit different than I did, and that was just coming through the system. Granted, though, some of the girls were extremely welcoming. Mary Earps being one of them. Honestly, she was one of the most welcoming people on that camp that I remember, and a few other girls as well. And if there's one thing about Mary, that's one thing I will always remember about her. But yeah, I think it was just understanding that yes, you're absolutely right. I think having a mom that was born in London and, I did inherit that, essentially, but I think it was just everything was so new and everything came so quickly to the point where I felt like I didn't have a really good opportunity to really digest everything that was going on around me. And I think sometimes I'm like an introvert, extroverted person. So when I'm around new people, and I think at first I kind of get my bearings a little bit, and that camp was only maybe like a week, 2 weeks long. Um, and so I don't think it was enough time for me to really truly get an opportunity to get to know the girls, and and really kind of fit myself into there. So and then I had camps after that that I got invited to that I did feel a little bit better in. I felt like a little bit more like myself, and it came a little bit more naturally with camps after that. But I just think not growing up in England, not really knowing the girls, not really kind of going through the system like every single one of these girls did, is why I felt as perhaps this isn't what is right for me, what is best for me. Um, and on top of that, after 2015, the World Cup in 2015, the Lionesses just like absolutely took off. That was the year that they got third in the World Cup, and it just everything just kind of went phew for them after that. And to be quite honest, I just didn't think I fit into that setup and into that style that they were looking for. So, beliefs to say, the experience itself, it's priceless. There was, I would never ever um ever want to take any of that back, because I think it shaped me essentially for who I eventually became, throughout my professional career. And again, experience is experience at the end of the day. So the fact that I have international experience under my belt is incredible, and it's a part of my story, it's a part of my journey, and I would never want to take that away for any reason.
I love that. And I think that's so important in terms of how you look at that international experience and how you can have that pride again when you look back towards that and where you are currently now. And I can say this on paper, but you might have a different perspective in terms of your own feelings. But you are very lucky in terms of, say the US national team didn't call you up,
Mhm.
England took off, and you maybe didn't have that sense of belonging. You've actually got, I believe, three other countries which you're eligible for, and you've
Yeah,
actually represented Jamaica in terms of that. So
yeah,
one of them being Antigua and Barbuda, if I've pronounced that correctly. Um,
yeah, yeah,
Guyana, if I've again
yeah.
pronounced that correctly.
Guyana,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
got three countries there which you can also represent, and you've been lucky enough whereby rather than missing out on international experience altogether, you've actually been capped by your national team or a national team in Jamaica in terms of
Right.
what you've been able to do in terms of that experience where you've been called up to that squad and
Yeah,
being part of the Reggae Girls, which is an amazing experience in terms of, England do play in the Euros, they play in the World Cup, USA play in the World Cup and they play in the CONCACAF. And then the Jamaican team play in the Gold Cup and they play on a different part of the world in terms of their other tournaments, which are eligible towards them. And each of them got their own different stories which you can represent. They're all amazing ones which you can do. But when it came to Jamaica and that opportunity, was it again? How did that sort of feel and shape in terms of that experience which you've had because of that national experience?
yeah. So Jamaica kind of came about in a really interesting way. They had been they had been interested in me since I was in college, but the whole thing is you cap for one national team, you can't cap for any. So in the early stages of my career at UNC, I was still holding out for the US. So I had no interest in Jamaica. That was just that. Um, but the reality of it all is that my dad's Jamaican, I'm Jamaican, so there's that. And Jamaica came about in 2021 actually, and the coach at the time, we had a really long conversation about things, and I got called into the Jamaican national team during a really, I would consider like a really fragile point in my career. I had taken a bit of a hiatus from football after 2020. The pandemic had hit. I ended up getting away from Houston. So in the beginning of 2021, I decided to take a bit of a hiatus from football. But the national team, Jamaica had, reached out, and I admitted to the coach, I was like, listen, I haven't really played on a professional team, in about 5 months. I don't really know if that's something that it's gonna, kind of throw you off a little bit, but I'm just being honest with you. He was like, "No worries." So first things was first. I had to get my passport, get all my citizenship and all that stuff sorted, and that was a challenge within itself. But my first camp that I got in the U.S. It was in the U.S. It was actually in my home state of Texas, and the US was putting on like a what was it, like a soccer sorry, like a summer tournament of 2021. And it was in Houston, which is about 2.5 hours from where I live. And so the US was making exceptions at the time because it was the pandemic and they knew national teams had girls that were eligible but may have not had the right paperwork, whatever, but they were still allowing people to come. So the coach had called me and said, "Hey, I know you live in Austin. Do you want to come to this camp in Houston where we'll be playing the US and Nigeria?" I was like, absolutely. It's national team experience. But I was like, when I say I was like in my worst form of like, fitness and everything, but I was like, it's an opportunity. So I'm just gonna go and do it. And so that's kind of how it came about. I ended up then after that I ended up actually getting signed with Bristol my first year, and then came out here, lost a whole lot of weight, was playing, and then got called back into another camp with Jamaica later on in 2021, in October of 2021, and had probably one of my best camps with Jamaica then, and it just kind of happened from there. So um it's been, with anything though, and now that I've gotten a chance to experience the international stage from like a senior team, I've gotten a taste of it. And I think I realized why international experience hasn't been a big part of my career. Is because I just don't think it's for me. I think there's a whole lot within, no matter what national team you play for, I think there's always some sort of something going on with it. And that's what I experienced with Jamaica. And so um, my right before actually the selection for the World Cup last summer, I told them that I didn't want to be considered for any more camps. And the reason being is because, it for me, being in a part of an environment where I felt like it wasn't very good for my mental health, I started to realize very quickly that maybe there was a reason why I wasn't a part of the international setup from the early stages of my life. I think, I think there was something out there that just probably realized that it just wasn't for me, just focus on club and just enjoy that. And, that's what I've been doing ever since. And it's been good.
And there's a couple of points in that, as everything that you say, because there is so much within that which is really important. And it's really interesting that you say that international football isn't for you. And you talk about again that mental health side, but that it can be a real tough decision because something which has recently come up in the news, and I'm not sure whether you've seen it, is Ben White withdrawing from the England squad. Now
Mhm.
that's caused a lot of controversy in terms of how other professionals have looked at that, or ex-professionals, and they said, well, how could he even turn down the national team? There is no bigger disrespect for that. But then speaking to someone now firsthand, sort of within that time frame, a week after, etc. And I've got someone who's saying actually it doesn't interest me and it's not part of my sort of playing, my playing journey and where I'm at. It's such an interesting point because when you consider club football and maybe some of your other allegiances and how that's looked beyond, and maybe your other national teams haven't worked out, and therefore you've actually gone and experienced one, had a great time, and then in a couple of years you've gone, actually, do you know what? It's not a big factor in my life. It's not like I've got 50, 60, 70 caps. I'm
Right.
still very young in terms of that infancy, in terms of that experience. And therefore, do you know what? I actually want to just concentrate on club football. I've had a bit of that experience. I'm happy with what I got. The door's still always open for me, and it's a very interesting sort of ploy when you look at that. And I've had two professionals on the podcast before, but they've both been males. Now, one could represent Jamaica and one did represent Jamaica. Now,
Mhm.
the one who didn't represent Jamaica was a bit like you, didn't have the interest when the call came and actually chose not to have the call up when that came about. And then the other one decided to take that call up and pledge his allegiance. So both had other allegiances but could play for Jamaica. Now, when
Right.
I spoke to the second one who got called up to Jamaica, he actually couldn't understand the perspective of the first person that I spoken to who said he rejected it. And he was just so mind boggled and baffled by it. But when you come down to those sort of perspectives and those sort of personal gains and outlooks towards it, it all comes down to personal preference, where everyone is within their own lives, how they're looking at club level, if they're really enjoying it, and actually whether international experience actually benefits them. Because some good points which are made, for example, Ben White being called up, is, well, actually, why would he want to go and sit in a national camp, lose a bit of time with his family, to not get on the bench when he's perhaps third, fourth, fifth in the pecking order? I
Mhm.
might not even see a single minute in terms of the international friendlies right now. And it all comes down to personal preference. And at the end of the day, it's whether you want to represent that national team or not. And it's not like, you spent your life growing up in Jamaica, you played for all the youth systems, you were, a big part of their squads, and then suddenly you've got, nope, no more for me. you've actually sort of been withdrawn from it by focusing on the US and then having the opportunity of England, and then this opportunity's come round for you, and you've actually gone, yeah, I've done I've made the commitment, I've given myself to you, but at this moment in time for me, I'm just going to withdraw myself from selection, and that can be a real sort of brave move to make. And some people might go, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. But as long as you're truly happy with it in your career, and as you say, when you look back, as long as you're happy with it, then that's all that really matters.
Agreed, agreed, and I couldn't agree more with that, and I think something that you touched on is about the preference, and I also think it's about personal experience, because my experience with Jamaica was probably significantly different than other girls' experiences within the team, and other girls within the team find joy when playing and being a part, being in that environment because their experiences are a lot different. Me, on the other hand, especially like later on in my time with Jamaica, I realized that my experience here is not like everyone else's, and that's okay. And that's fine. But at the end of the day, that's what it came down to was, was my happiness, was my mental being, was, just at the end of the day, I was choosing me and choosing, like I think for so long I've been choosing what other people want from me and, and I guess other people's expectations of what I should do rather than what I think I should do and how I should go about it. And it came to a point where, certain things had transpired when I was playing with Jamaica, and I thought, I keep making excuses for it because, it's the international stage, this stuff happens. But it got to a point where I thought, you know what? No, screw this. I'm not going to constantly put my well-being, my mental health on the line or kind of shoved to the side just for, a camp here and there. It's not worth it, I deserved, a lot more respect. I deserved a lot more out of the experience than I had gotten. And at the end of the day, it was just kind of solely about just about my own personal experience as to why I did that. So I agree. I think a lot of it just comes down, the two, men you were talking about, how the other one was mind blown about the other one not choosing, because he probably experienced something, whatever that for him he thought, you know what, it's just not worth it. But the one that he did decide to declare and and pledge his allegiance to Jamaica, absolutely, he saw something it he knew that he'd have a good experience with it, and I hope he does. But that was what was it for me. It was just my own personal experience was just so it was crazy because I look back at it and as I reflect, I think it started off so high. It started off so high with them, and then it just gradually I just felt like it just gradually got worse and worse, and it just sucks because I really was having a good time, my first few camps, with them, and then after that, it just kinda got a bit bad for me.
And when you sort of had that conversation with them and you wanted to withdraw from being available to be selected for the national team,
Mhm.
was that or is that a really difficult conversation to have when you are approached to have that?
It wasn't for me. I think I was set. I think my mind was made up. I think it was, I had a discussion with my mom, my partner, and I was just about to come here to Bristol, so I had a a conversation with Lauren, my coach, and I kind of she was probably the one that I had the conversation with the longest about what to do because it was right before the World Cup, and I had spoken to her and I said, "Hey, listen, this is the sort of experience I've had with this team. They're about to make the World Cup selection. I feel like I might be on it, but I don't. Obviously, I wasn't certain. I had no idea, but I was like, I don't want to go to Australia, be there for, the better part of what, 5, 6 weeks, and then it ends up being like the worst experience of my life. So, coming to you, I know I'm about to come back to Bristol, what are your thoughts on all of this? And we had a really good conversation, a very open dialogue about things. So I had that conversation with her. I spoke to my mom. My mom, she is all about her kids. And, once her kids are feeling anything, she kind of brings it upon herself as well. And she said, listen, I'll support, anything it is that you do. Same with my partner. So it was and then I had the conversation with myself, and I thought I have to figure out what's best for me. If it's going to Australia and and playing. in the biggest tournament for football that there is, the biggest dream of mine, um, do I want to do it? Or do you want to save yourself from anything worse and just focus on club? Because I was just about to come move back over here to England, and I was like, should I just focus on stuff at club, moving back to England, and just kind of getting my priorities in order? And that's what I decided, and it was the best thing that I could have ever done. I think it gave me a chance to come back here, acclimatize to things, and get settled, and then get ready for preseason, ultimately. But, I look back and, some people ask me, "Oh, do you regret not going to the World Cup?" I don't. I definitely don't, because I knew what would have come of it had I gone, and I don't regret it. Not even the money. Like, they're like, "Oh, because Jamaica advanced out of the group stages," and everybody was like, "Sad, that was good money," and I was like, "I understand that, but at the end of the day, you can't put a price on my mental health," and that was my whole thought process behind it.
And when that mental health comes into it in that position, and this is again another topic and discussion within itself, and could be a whole separate episode in a different discussion on a different platform. But the Jamaican national women's team isn't always formatted in the best way from some of the conversations which I've seen and what I see on their Instagram posts and etc.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of a political side, as you've mentioned before, involved in the current Jamaican national setup. So just to add the perspective onto that for those who might be listening is for even yourself to maybe withdraw yourself from consideration, that could just be the main factor within itself, because the national setup in terms of how that's come across and developed over the last few years, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding that from that Jamaican perspective. And
Yeah.
sometimes for players is they withdraw themselves because it's not the best position for them to be in or the best environment as well. And therefore it's easier not to have that impact on their mental health, that commitment, travel, etc., etc.
Exactly. Yeah, spot on. I think sometimes with the JFF, you know, the thing is with the reggae girls, there's so much talent on the team, so much talent. You got Bunny Shaw, who's an absolute machine here in the Super League for Man City. Um, Becky Spencer, Drew Spence, all of these top players that are, playing for big time clubs, and doing really well, and have made history, um, qualifying for back-to-back World Cups, and then, the second World Cup actually making it out of the group stages. And it's like that isn't ever recognized, acknowledged by the JFF, and if you really look at it, if you really look at the sort of treatment that we got as a team, and as players, it was deplorable. It made no sense as to like why that was the case. You heard, like you even said, some of the stories that you read and you heard about certain things like with travel and resources and what have you. Being in it and being a part of it was just, it got comical to a point, and so that was a factor into, why I didn't want to be a part of the setup anymore, but there was other factors as well that kind of played a part. And but at the end of the day, I'm comfortable and I'm pleased with the decision that I made. And obviously, I will always support and have love for the national team, for the Reggae Girls, because it gave me an opportunity that I hadn't experienced before, and it was great. Being a part of the CONCACAF Championships, 2 years ago in Mexico, and being a part of that and playing in that and having that opportunity, and experiencing that was unbelievable. And it's memories that I will forever have in my mind, and I can never take those away, and I never want to. So it wasn't all bad, don't get me wrong, it was not all bad at all. There were some really amazing and historical moments that I was so proud to be a part of. But there was just certain things where I thought, you know what, I can't continuously keep putting myself to the side, for the sake of it. Something had to give, and just my international career. But it's okay. The experiences, the memories, they're priceless. So I'm so proud of the things that I've accomplished and that we accomplished as a team collectively. And I would do it again if I could. So it was awesome.
And again, when it comes down to that personal experience, only what you can take away in those memories, as long as they mean what they mean to you, that's the most important thing, because it's your career, it's your life, it's your decision at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, then is that door permanently shut for you, or is it a little bit open with the opportunity in the future?
Oh, I would say it's permanently closed. Being 30 now, and there really isn't any ambition with international stuff anymore. I think the biggest thing for me now is just first and foremost getting back from injury, and then just getting back and being at my best for club. That for me is what my priorities are, and then second thing is obviously now prioritizing what life is going to be like for me after football. And so yeah, international though, it was fun while it lasted. I got a chance to experience things and travel to some unbelievable places, with it. So I had a bit of a taste of it, and it was great. And I think I can say that I had my fix, and now I think I'm done with it.
And that's fair enough. And it's again, as long as you're happy. But just to touch upon it before we move on from the international selection, did the other two opportunities or the other two countries to represent those ever come into consideration or ever present themselves?
Guyana and Antigua and
Yep.
Bermuda, they did actually. Yes, both actually did, but it was hard trying to get um like proof of eligibility because I'm Guyanese through my grandma on my mom's side, but she since passed away. So you would have to get proof with that. And then I'm Antiguan through my mom's dad, who also passed away. He passed away back in the '80s, so it was it's hard to kind of get that proof for eligibility. But yeah, they both came into play. They both asked, and I don't know what could have come of it, but yeah, they both did. So again, it's an honor to have been scouted by and and been approached by both. Because it's always an honor to get those call ups from any national team, regardless of wherever it is. Playing for your country has got to be the highest honor of playing the sport. So yeah, but it was I did get called up by both.
And I think that's so interesting because as a listener, even myself learning from you and understanding more as we have this conversation, for someone who's grown up in the USA and presented themselves in terms of the college game and the achievements that you've had, then to come across to England and have the opportunity to play for the under 23s on a big club like Liverpool at club level in Bristol, and then to have the opportunity to play at a national team for Jamaica, while also having two other doors and other managers approach you about representing those countries. What an incredible journey from the US across five different national teams or five different national opportunities, for example, for one player to certainly have, because some players might not even have one experience, but to have, say, five different doors, even though I know the US, you didn't say get into that youth level, but the door was there
Yeah.
at some point. To have five different doors you could go for, I think is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's what I guess sometimes I do not necessarily look at it like that, and I don't know why. I guess because it's just this is just who I was what I was born into. But I think when you look at it from the way that from your perspective, it really is amazing. It's wonderful, and it's funny. I so kind of shifting things a little bit. So when I was took that little bit of a hiatus from football back in 2021, I was working for a media company that was based in Oakland called Black Arrow FC, and we had a project with La Liga North America, and we ended up actually doing a story on Yunus Musa, who plays for the U.S. men's national team. But his story was so similar to mine because he was born in New York, like I was, but he's I think born to Ghanaian parents, and then he moved to England, uh, and then I think played in Italy, played in Spain. So he was eligible to play for I think the U.S., Ghana, England, Italy, and I want to say I think perhaps there was one more. And when we were making the film, it was actually around when he was making the selection, because he had kind of gone through the England youth system. I think he was playing for like the England, under 19s, and um, I think, but the England seniors were obviously very interested in him, and so when we were writing the story about him and kind of figuring out like kind of what scope to look at it from, I was like, wow, this guy is kind of like me, eligible to play for like five different countries, and you have the big question mark, as to um, it's like, oh wow, it's really impressive, and I was super impressed with, and really I thought it was just very cool that he was eligible to play for five countries when, I think sometimes forgetting that I also can do the same thing as well. So yeah, I think, when you're the person, and you're like myself, you don't think about it as much, but I think it's a really cool thing. And I'm so blessed to have parents that, aren't from America. They're from different countries, and I grew up in a different culture and a different background, and being able to have the opportunity to represent those cultures and those backgrounds is an honor, and it's a blessing, honestly. So thanks, mom and dad, for bringing me into this life, into this family. Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting how you looked upon that player and that opportunity to look at what you've had personally in terms of how that might have looked for someone else, and just connecting maybe some of the dots and maybe some of the questions in between, which might have been presented from the time that you did that film and that sort of project, which is really interesting one for sure. But just before we move on, there might have been one player you might have come across. You might not know her at all. She has previously appeared on a podcast, and her name is Yasmin Jameson, and she was a goalkeeper for the Jamaican national team.
Yeah,
So
I
she's
do know
appeared on a
Yas, I
pod.
do. Yeah.
So
Yes.
really interesting. So as I was reading and doing my preparation, I was like, oh, I wonder whether Satara knows Yasmin. So
I
great
I do.
opportunity.
Yeah, Yaz and I went to quite a few camps together, actually. And it's interesting because I think Yaz and I both shared something in common in terms of like with our experiences with Jamaica and the national team. And I remember how I think one of the last camps that we went to together, I do remember having like a proper conversation with her about, our experiences, and kind of just like talking about what we were both going through. 'Cause I think we were kind of going through similar situations, if I remember correctly. But she's a lovely person. She's probably one of the realest people I've ever met. She keeps it 100, all the time. And she's just a great person overall. You know what I mean? And it was great playing with her. And she was a hell of a goalkeeper as well. So, um, yeah, but it's really incredible the people that you meet along the way in these, on your journey. Yaz being obviously a prime example, but all the girls that I played with, with the Jamaica women's national team, it was some incredible girls that I got a chance to be around, and I will always be forever grateful for the people and the friendships that I developed along the way.
And I think that's important in terms of those people, those relationships, how you meet those people along the way. So, you've had that opportunity to be part of that national team, but, there might be relationships which you still have, in the next 5, 10 years, for example, but you only, chose to walk away from a national team, but your friendships live on. And that's
Right,
another important perspective of life, which is going to continue after sport, hopefully, even as you extend your relationships amongst players which you haven't come across yet and might
right.
continue to do so as you move on. But one of the key questions that I was going to ask you was, what is the biggest conflict you've ever faced as a player? Now, have we covered it in terms of that being a national team, or is there something else that might have been in your career?
Oh, I think we covered it with my national team. I think that was probably the most the biggest thing of conflict that I probably have dealt with in my career. I've dealt with very little conflict throughout my career, which I'm super thankful for. In regards to, in terms of the experiences that I've had. But I think with the national team, that's probably been it. Obviously I don't want to go into too much detail about what it was exactly, but what I can say is that there were certain things that were said or not said, lack of communication, transparency, that I felt as though could have been a lot better, and communicated a lot better, with the national team, that I felt as though wasn't, and I'm a grown woman, at the end of the day, come and talk to me like I am one. If there's a problem, if there's anything I did or didn't do, come and have a conversation with me about it. And I think that was probably my biggest issue that I had while playing on the team. Was there was certain actions would be done, but there would be no communication as to why it happened, and that's very triggering for anybody, because you don't know if you did something wrong, or if it's just a tactical decision, or whatever the case may be. And I think that has to have been probably one of the biggest things that has happened, throughout my career, is just being a part of an environment where communication is just poor, and I can operate like that. That's probably, I'm big on communication. I'm big on transparency, and especially in this stage of my life, where I'm done guessing or playing mind games. I can't read minds, So as long as you keep it real with me, you let me know what's up, or if you let me know, what I'm doing is not good enough, or whatever it is, just let me know, because I'd rather know the truth and know and have the honesty with it rather than, oh, like I'm just sat there kind of guessing. It's like a guessing game, I'm too old for games. So I just need transparency across the board, great communication across the board. And I think that's exactly what I lacked with the national team. And that was a big part as to why I didn't want to be a part of it anymore.
And that's fair enough. And I'm appreciate you delving into maybe some of the little issues as to why, and opening up that next question in terms of communication, that style, because linking it to a question which I was going to ask you is, when a match day squad is presented and you might not see yourself on the bench or even part of a match day squad, how does that feel when you're not part of that squad or you're not selected, and how do you deal with that as a player?
Oh, so that happened to me actually so far, the season with Bristol. And I don't the thing is that I like to know things beforehand. I think, when things are just kind of presented and you're finding out for the first time without anything being told beforehand, it's a bit hard because you want to know like what's going on. It's happened to me in the past in clubs before, and funny story, when I was playing for the Houston Dash, um, that happened to me. So throughout the week, I hadn't been training with the starters, and we had a game against the reigning NWSL champions, and I mean they were a really good squad. And mind you, this was my first stint in the NWSL, and this was like my first game where I was able to dress and be a part of the squad with Houston, because the games prior, my paperwork wasn't in order yet, so I wasn't eligible to play. But my paperwork was in order for this game in particular, and the whole week I was thinking, I'm just happy to be a part of a part of the team, a part of the bench, just get a chance to kind of be in the atmosphere. I found out an hour and 40 minutes before kickoff that I was starting, and look, at when I say my nerves went into straight overdrive. And I was nervous, because it was my first game ever in the NWSL. Mind you, I had played several hundreds of professional games prior, but there's just something about it being your first time in a new league on a new team with new girls. And he didn't my coach, he didn't communicate with me beforehand that I was starting, and I found out the same time everybody else did. He announced the team the day of the game, and I ended up having a terrible game. And so when things are not said beforehand, it's hard because you kind of like, for me personally, I like to prepare for things beforehand. I don't like finding out things right there and then, or finding out when everybody else does. For me, I would prefer somebody to bring me aside and be like, "Hey, Sat, this is the situation, whatever." But when I find out right there and then, like, this is what's happening, it's a bit crazy. Then you got people coming up to you after being like, "Oh, like, did you know this was happening, or did you know that was happening?" And it's like, I had no idea. So, sometimes it could be a bit crap, not having the opportunity to not being on the bench or being in the starting 11, and you don't have any sort of understanding as like why this is the case. You just kind of find out whatever, with everybody else. I mean, that happened so many times when I was in Houston, because we travel so much in the NWSL. Um, when I was in Houston, I wouldn't even travel for games, but I would find out, my coach wouldn't text me beforehand. I would just find out when he brought the list out of who was traveling, and that was it. So it was what it even happened at my last club in the NWSL as well. So it's just one of those things where you just kind of have to deal with it. But when you see that and nobody communicates with you beforehand, it's just I think it's not nice to deal with. So yeah.
I think that's such an important perspective, insight, and scope to really talk about from someone who is in that professional game, in that environment, and has had that different experience from a wide context in terms of playing in a new league, being in a new team, how that's presented an hour and a half before a match day, for example, that you're within the starting lineup when you're not selected, and how that combination comes in terms of that organisation, preparation, that communication. For you as a player, in terms of that mental preparation, that is really important to be thrown in an hour and a half, is a very short window for you to be mentally prepared. Whereas if you knew a few days before, that's 3 days of preparing yourself to getting in there, 3 days of visualization, which we know in terms of psychology is very, very important. So, it's interesting because sometimes as a coach, you might put up your squad, you've got your you might just have a selection of players which are in and then those who are out. And that can be really difficult to play within that in terms of if you're not selected. But then when it comes down to actually going, right, this is starting 11, this is the bench, I think that's really important how that is communicated and how that organization comes into play, because you might want to spend half an hour talking in between, the entire defensive unit in terms of all your responsibilities, how you're going to look, what is your scenarios, how's this going to be. And I know you have training in terms of how that looks across the course of the week, but over that course of the week, you actually might have a player returning from injury. You might have a rotational perspective in terms of that. Your shape might be a little bit different. You might set up differently for opposition on a game day. And so a lot of operations on the game day might be different because although your principles might be in place, your tactical approach might be very different because of the scenarios and variables which have been placed upon that team. So therefore, you might spend half an hour with that defensive unit discussing what the roles, responsibilities, the outcomes, etc., might be. So I think that's very important in terms of how that communication, in terms of how a team is communicated and how that looks.
Exactly, spot on. And interestingly enough, so after this happened with me when I was in Houston, I actually had a conversation with my coach like into the next week. We went over some clips and everything, and I was honest with him, and I said, James, I finding out an hour and 40 minutes before kickoff that I was starting, I'm the type of person where I need at least 24 hours, beforehand. And he did take it on board quite well, to be fair. And I after that he let me know beforehand, yada yada. And he let the team know, collectively, so on and so forth. So I think, just having that open communication about things was good. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes, with players, some players are totally fine. They can find out 10 minutes before the game kicks off and like, oh fine, no worries. And they can go out there and absolutely ball out. I'm not one of those players. Never have been, never will be. It takes me at least 24 to 48 hours to like mentally prepare for a game because it's a big thing, and I've realized, having that mental um envision with things. I've really kind of taken that on board as I've gotten older and, throughout my career, kind of just like putting myself in certain scenarios before a game. I can't do that, an hour and a half before a game. That requires me having at least minimum 24 hours beforehand doing that. So yeah, it's just, and like you also mentioned, having conversations with, my back line and my goalkeeper and understanding my role, understanding what it is that I'm doing, what I'm not doing. And I just feel like I just think it's crazy that, some coaches genuinely think like that's okay, that you can just do that and players are going to be okay. We're all different, and we all approach games differently. We all approach life differently, so for me it's just having that open conversation, that open dialogue about things beforehand, rather than okay, let's just do it last minute and that's that. It may work for some people, but again, I'm not one of those people. And so yeah, just but and I realized that about myself. Um, as maybe like as I got into like my mid 20s, I kind of understood what kind of player I am and how I like things communicated. There's been several instances before on, when I was playing for Liverpool and, we as a team collectively like had little workshops where we kind of understood how each other likes to be communicated to. So for me, I realized that across the board, like my teammates come and have an open, honest conversations with me, communicate things with me that I can do better, things that I'm doing well. Same with my coaches, I like to kind of know beforehand, hey, you're starting, but let me know like a day or so before, rather than, oh, I find out an hour and a half before kickoff. It's just, to me, that's just mind blowing, honestly.
And very difficult again when it comes down to that preparation and what might be required in terms of your own prep. So for some players, they might adjust to it and take it in their stride. For other players, they might need a few days to regulate and register that in terms of how that might look. And I think that's really important for that perspective for any coach who is listening and for any young player in terms of how that might look for them as well. So two different perspectives, as you were saying, that I was considering. I think it's really important how that looks for your players, how that's communicated across, and that preparation which comes into it as well. But sort of taking a different stance on it, but building upon relationships and communications. back when you're a younger player, and obviously when you're a younger player, your relationships are built on maybe friendships and the enjoyment of being within that environment and being with the team. But
Mhm.
you're also in that environment where you're trying to fight for a scholarship or professional contract. Now it's very hard because you're on two different fronts there, whether it's about enjoying it and having friends, or whether you're fighting for that contract. And then it can have a sort of conflict in between that, because as players, especially as you see in the American game, where you see on Twitter where they're posting their CVs about playing, and they're very big on media for a young age, as I see from 14, 15, 16, as they're competing for that over what I've seen across social media. Social media has become a very powerful tool, and that is a separate topic within itself. But on the foundation of those relationships and that communication and how that looked for you as a younger player, was it very tough to sort of compete against friends at that time because you're looking for that scholarship, or was it very much, yeah, this will happen, relationships will break down or they'll carry on? How did that look for you?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. I think the club that I played for in Austin, we were a very, very tight-knit team. Yeah, I think majority of us played with each other from like the ages of like 11 up until when we graduated from high school at 17, 18. So, um, obviously like anything we had squabbles, but in terms of competing, for scholarships, whatever, I think at the end of the day, we were a very good team, one of the best teams in the country. And at the end of the day, I think we all knew that we would go and play Division 1, Division 2, Division 3 soccer somewhere. I think everybody knew at some point that that was what was destined for all of us. So there was never, I don't think there was ever really a need or a desire to feel like we were constantly having to compete against each other, in club. Now, college, that's a completely different story, but I don't think it ever really ruined any friendships. One thing about, I think, college soccer, it's like a little family, and I don't allow football, soccer itself to kind of get in between that family, that unity that we have. But of course, and especially at UNC, I think people look at UNC and they're just like, oh my God, like it must have been, such a competitive environment. And it was. I mean, every single thing it is that we did at UNC, there was data being collected. So yes, it was competitive in that sense. But I always tell people, like, when you're in that environment and stuff, you don't really think about it like that. You're just going out there and enjoying what you're doing, and that's that. And I think everybody just kind of approached it like that. But I've never in my years of playing either youth soccer or college soccer ever really saw friendships come to an end because of soccer. Now, maybe some other treacherous things that perhaps went on, but in terms of it being solely because, oh, you were competing against each other and that's that, I've never really seen that. And I'm thankful I have never seen that, because that would be crazy. Obviously this is a very competitive sport, and it's only 11 positions that can be filled at once, for a game. So, when you're having a team full, when I was at UNC, the roster was about 26 to 27 players, um so it was always like a revolving door, but yeah, I like to say that I've never seen that, and thankfully in club soccer I never saw it either, and thankfully I was a part of a team where everybody, for the most part, I think everybody, the entire team went on and played soccer collegiately at either D1, D2, or D3 school, and ended up having very successful, college careers, and now have very successful lives. So yeah, but that competitiveness, that competitive drive, I think one thing about it, you can take it, like, it stays on the pitch and that's it. It doesn't leave the pitch after that, and that is one thing that I love. I even see it now as a professional. I've never seen in my entire professional career, I've never seen friendships, go down the hole because two friends are competing for the same position. I've never seen that. So yeah, and I think that's a great thing to see, honestly.
Again, I appreciate the insight into that and how that's come across, and I'm glad those relationships haven't broken down, because there might be a political essence which breaks into those relationships in terms of, what you might see as a coach or spectator, especially between relationships between two groups or two friendships, for example. And you might see sometimes players and their families break down relationships because they are essentially trying to get ahead. They're trying to fight for that scholarship, and you do see that breakdown over time. And sometimes it be a pre-planned breakdown because they feel that they have to break away from a relationship to try and put themselves in their front footing to try and be more successful, especially
Right.
when there might only be one contract on offer. And now that's where sport can be very political, it can be very tough to have, especially at a younger age. But I think the important point there is to not break down relationships, to have more unity, to have that family environment and that feel, and then to make sure that that friendship still exists regardless of where everyone ends up. Because, as you say, in terms of that group, everyone's gone on and had successful opportunities in their lives and what they may see in terms of what they have in front of them now. And you've become a professional footballer, your other friends have done well in terms of their own personal lives and how that looks for them. And as long as you're all happy, you still have that friendship at the heart of it, then that's the most important thing. Because yes, we might only have one opportunity to try and succeed and have that professional contract or scholarship, but at the end of the day, there's not much winning in life if you don't have a social group around you. Because as you get older, you become either very lonely or you become disengaged from other people, and therefore you actually lose out on quite a lot in life, and therefore you're not actually winning in terms of what the social elements of life could be, because you've broken down all those bridges.
Exactly. I agree. And I've seen that before with people in the past that, you're so football slash soccer driven and you've kind of pushed away the most important people in your life that all you really have is your sport. I've seen that happen before. And it's not a really nice sight to see at all. And so I think you have to be, everything is about perspective. I think it's okay to have that competitive fire in you. So it's okay to, to be very focused and very, focus driven on, on your job and on your career. But what keeps that going, in my opinion, is the people that you're surrounded by. I think the one reason why I've kept going in my career and in my life is solely because of the people that I have surrounded by me, and from my mom to my sister to my nephew to my brother-in-law to my partner to my best friends to my teammates, all of that keeps me, I think, grounded and quite humble. And I always know that they keep me going through all of this. And I never like seeing people get so focused on the sport itself that they kind of forget about the people that kind of help get them there and kind of help uplift them, and kept their head on straight to help them get there. Um and sometimes it is quite sad to see, but I hope that, people listening, anyone listening to this knows that you can have it all. You can be successful in your sport and you can have the wonderful support system. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can have both and you can have one, you can definitely have the other. It's not a determinant factor of, oh my God, if I don't give this up, if I don't, end this friendship or end the situation with, this person, I'm not going to be able to be, at my most successful. Absolutely not. I think you can be very, focus driven in your career and whatever it is that you want to do, but also make sure that you have the people that love you the most that are supporting you and are behind you 100%. Because at the end of the day, those are the people that's always going to have your back. Those are the people that are forever. The sport isn't forever. It's about the people that you have in your corner that really, I think, it's what makes all of this worth it. And if you don't have any of that, what is your purpose then?
I love that. And in terms of a quote and how that looks, I think that's going to be such a great quote to take away, because sport isn't forever, and everything else that you say in terms of that you kind of have both, that relationships can still remain, and everything that adds plays in terms of what you're saying, how that will come out as a quote, I think is a truly great one. And how you piece that together, it truly is so authentic. And as you've done right throughout naturally and done so well, is that everything has transitioned so nicely with it fitting all together just by a series of questions, all this facilitation which has come into play. Now, just touching upon those relationships and those friendships, I'd like to sort of branch that and relate it back to your time at Bristol. So when you sort of left Bristol, you went to another club, you come back to Bristol. So
Mhm.
there's an interesting perspective in terms of how that opportunity of leaving comes about, but then how that door might reopen for you and how it might be different that second time around. And those relationships which you once had might not be the same, or they might actually improve. And there might be a magnitude of different ways and ways you can look at it and consider. But that relationship between you coming back to Bristol was because, I suppose, built upon the successes that you had first time round and the foundations whereby you had good relationships to keep that door open, and therefore allowed you to come back to Bristol once you returned from that other club.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the last conversations I had with Lauren, who was my manager then, is still the manager now. She I remember one of the last conversations we had, and we kind of reflected on that season, and they took a risk on me, with me when they had signed me back in 2021. They were aware that, I hadn't played for months, because that was, again, that was when I was taking my hiatus, and they took a risk on me, but, Lauren said one of the reasons why they brought me in is because they knew the sort of experience that I had had. And I didn't know what coming to Bristol would be like when I came my first year. I was in such a weird place mentally that I had no expectations. It was just like, come here, enjoy it, and then crack on, But I ended up having the absolute time of my freaking life. And I made the decision to go back to the NWSL. And I remember thinking right before I left and moved back to the States, I didn't question, was I making the right decision? Everything that could have gone right for me in Bristol did that first season. And I didn't, I went back to the NWSL and I thought, I'm already sat I was already sat there just like, trying to I'm sat there comparing, how my time in Bristol was compared to how my time was going at racing. And so going back to that conversation with Lauren, she was like, we took a risk, but it was the best thing that we could have done. And she was like, it was great she's like, it was great having you here. And she's like, if you ever want to come back, the door is always open. And I think that's the sort of way I wanted to end it, because I knew a part of me wanted to come back to Bristol. A part of me just, I couldn't shake it off. I really couldn't. And obviously I went back to the NWSL and, I had a little bit of success with racing, but my mind was still very much on Bristol. I remember coming back here during my off season with racing, and I came to visit. I went to one of Bristol's games, and, I was still so much caught up on, like, missing Bristol. I loved it, it was home for me, and it felt like this is where I belonged. And so when things kind of going a bit sideways for me at racing, I wanted to kind of plant the seeds early, with coming back here, because they were about to get promoted, and I knew they'll be back in Super League. And I was like, all of this stuff kind of like aligns perfectly. And so I kept in touch with a lot of the girls that were still here. And yeah, it was, I felt like it was serendipitous for me to come back here. So but yeah, kind of going back with, touching back on with the relationships, and kind of keeping those relationships and keeping those doors open. That's kind of exactly what I wanted to do when I left here the first time, because a part of me knew I definitely wanted to come back here at some point. Did I think it would be as soon as it was? Absolutely not. But it was, and I'm so happy to be back. And season hasn't obviously gone the way that we wanted it to, but at the end of the day, for me, this is home, and I'm happy to be back. And most importantly, I'm ready to get back and start playing. But yeah, it's those relationships are what matter the most. You know what I mean? And for me, that, and like going back to what I said earlier, in the conversation about how people remember you, and how you want people to remember you, and your legacy and the character that you hold. And for me, that's what's important. The fact that I was welcomed back here with open arms, even after leaving after a year, I think is a true indication of the sort of person that I am, and who I continuously thrive to be every single day. And that's what's important.
Well, I really love that, and I'm glad that you have that perspective in the way that people perceive you in terms of how that comes across, because it's so true in terms of how that does come across in a way that you're going to continue to have that impact and influence other people's lives. But when you left Bristol and could have gone and went back to USA, you could have gone there going, right, I'm actually back in US soil now. I'm back where my family is and around. I'm back where I grew up, and for you, it could have been a very easy stay because you're actually like, well, I'm actually only a few hours away from where everyone lives. I've got
Right,
friends who live here. I could have traveled, and it could have been very easy for you to have stayed. But when it comes back up and Bristol come back round so quickly, it's not like you're moving from one state to the other. You're actually moving back to somewhere you've already been. Now,
right.
it's a perspective that you could have gone, actually, I was very successful first time around. I'm very happy. Do I want to go back and maybe not have the success that I've had first time, as we see with some footballers and same with some managers as they go back to some clubs? And for you, it's like, well, actually, I could have been settled down and it might have been very easy. But as you said there, Bristol is your home. It's somewhere you love being and somewhere where you really wanted to return. So when it come back in such a short space of time, for you, that seems to be a very easy decision and something which you're relishing from, just taking that jump into going, right, I'm going to get straight back to Bristol. I'm going to make this jump to go straight back there, and I want to pick up where I left off.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, and although I mean, to be completely honest, I actually haven't really picked up from where I left off because I've just been injury prone this season. But through all of that, that's exactly right. I think, I could have easily, said, I'm just gonna stay in America, and that's that, leave it at that. But a couple of reasons why I came back here. One, I genuinely didn't think that I just suit the NWSL. I had done it twice, had the experiences that I had, and that was that. For me to come back here, it meant coming back to a place where I felt that I was respected and I felt as though I could just, unapologetically be myself. And that's just that, and Lauren just kind of allowed me to express myself on the pitch. And that's how I think that's how I'm able to play my best football. And so that was, all of the determining factors with it as well. But to be completely honest, coming back here has been a lot different than when I was here my first year. So much has changed, and you know situation is different. We're in the arguably one of the best leagues in the world for women's football. The season hasn't really kind of gone the way that we wanted it to. There's so many different circumstances that's going on right now that has already made this experience with Bristol my second time around very, very different than my first stint. Not necessarily bad, but just very different, and I think I'm having to learn how to adjust to like the change that has happened in the year that's gone, because a lot has changed in the year that I have been gone. And so it's still adjusting to that. But with that being said, I'm still so thankful to be back. I still feel like I'm at home. I feel as though, once things kind of start, getting a bit better in terms of injuries, I really will be given an opportunity to just pick up from where I left off. But a part of me is thinking that I don't want to pick up from where I left off. I want to start afresh. I want to start with a clean slate, kind of getting back to the basics and just kind of, just figuring out things bit by bit rather than putting this immense amount of pressure on myself to kind of have the same season that I had with Bristol my first year, because I think I put so much unnecessary pressure on myself. And as soon as I get back from these injuries and whatever, I think the plan is to, kind of start fresh and just kind of come in with the clean slate. But yeah, it's home for me. And I easily could have been like, you know what? I'm settled in America. My family's here, life is good here. But something just drew me back here. And, I think I know what it is. It's just being happy and, being happy here in Bristol.
And I think that's so interesting in terms of, not picking up where you left off, but actually wanting to start fresh and take that pressure off yourself because you might have placed yourself under unnecessary pressure, which you might say. And it can be very easy for you to do that now in terms of going, actually, well, I had success first time round. I'm on injury as well right now. So it's even bigger pressure for me to come back. And by the time you look at all the different sort of pillars which you could put in to your own mindset and that perspective, you could actually put on so much pressure by naturally adding them up one by one, and therefore that pressure which you might feel might not actually then allow you to be the player that you want to be, and therefore not perform the way that you need or want to be performing as well. So I think that
Right.
perspective and that opportunity for you to come back on a new slate and opening that up as, right, this is fresh, this is new, I want to do this time round, and taking that off and looking at it as, right, that was maybe chapter one, this is chapter two, and they have a bit of a transition where they're going to be looked at in two different total perspectives and opportunities. I think is a really important scope for you to really take upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, I think after my first injury, when I was coming back from my knee, that was like, I had this mindset like I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna be the player that I was before. And then, it was like unnecessary pressure, So I'm trying to look at things from like a different perspective, a different lens now, and understand that, you know, I'm not the player that I was 2 years ago. Things change, I'm 2 years older now, things on my body just don't, are just a little bit more fragile than when I was, in my mid-20s. So, but I think it's just taking it day by day. That's sort of patience that I'm having with myself now than I did before. It's just taking it day by day and just understanding that nothing happens before it's time. And at the end of the day, I'm here, I'm happy, and I'm enjoying being around my teammates and just constantly, developing those friendships and those partnerships with people. And so when I do get back, it's just kind of everything's coming back a bit naturally. But yeah, it's been a year of adversity. I'll be honest, it has been, but one way or another, it's definitely making me stronger. It's definitely not breaking me down. I've had moments where you have a breakdown, you're just like, "Why is this happening? Why is this happening?" But, all I wanna do is, it's enjoy football again and have fun with it. But oh, sorry, I'm getting a phone
That's
call.
right.
But yeah, so it's just, it just puts things into perspective for me. So, I'm learning from my first injury with the second one now, and I'm just being as patient with myself as possible and not trying to put any sort of excessive pressure on myself than I need to.
I think that's really important for you not to do that as well, and how you really approach that because of your own mental health, your own physical health, how you return, and that transition upon doing so as well. And really considering of time and considering that 10-minute window that we got left, and trying to get some quick fire questions in, and certainly the time of night it is as well. So fair play to you for that commitment which you're giving through. And honestly, I could sit here talking to you for 3 or 4 hours because honestly, you've taken the floor away, and just to cover, maybe 25% of the questions is unreal, and just shows how much of the conversation we've delved into. But just one more question before the quick fire. What is the most difficult thing about being a defender?
Well, you are on the last line, obviously, before other than the goalkeeper, but getting done by, and I feel like we do have an immense amount of responsibility in regards to not conceding anything, you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, I think a lot of players depend heavily on defenders to communicate with what's going on, because we have the best vision on pitch, and I think sometimes when things aren't communicated clearly enough, um, or you get done and stuff with things that are going on, So oh, sorry. Is my Wi-Fi okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, you've just cut out a little bit there in between.
Mm, okay, is this better?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, sorry. The Wi-Fi in this house is so bad.
It's not a problem whatsoever. It's fine.
Okay, I think we're good now. I think we're good.
No problems. So yeah, I think the last question we were on just before that little cut off there was we got to the point of what is the most difficult thing about being a defender, and you said that you have the most difficulties because you have the most responsibility and you have the best vision of the pitch. Was the last point we picked up on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I just think, especially being the last defender in the back line, 1v1 battles are so important. If you make a slight mistake, that's it, it's one. So I just think it's just like the responsibility side of it that is hard. But just like anything, as you grow older and you grow a bit wiser, you take on that responsibility, you take on that pressure like it's nothing. And for me, that's, it's my job. I get paid to do it and I enjoy it.
I love that, and I think that's really important in terms of that best vision which you have on the pitch, and that you might face the most difficulties as well, which is an interesting perspective. But now we've reached the quick fire stage because, again, I'm considerate of time and this commitment which you have upon your day and going in fresh tomorrow. But we're just going to jump straight into it, Satara. So, what team do you support?
Who? I'm gonna have to say Liverpool.
Liverpool. What an unfortunate
Yeah.
choice! And just as I thought, we were having a great conversation.
I think the only one of the main reasons being is because obviously playing there for 4 years, being a part of that culture, that environment, and just seeing what the club is about. It's fantastic, and they're just a great team, you know. So yeah, sorry for all the people out there, but Liverpool it is.
No problems at all. It's could be worse choices out there for sure.
Yeah,
But who
absolutely.
was or is your role model, both as a footballer and a person?
So as a person, well, I don't really look up to many athletes at all, if I'm being completely honest. My mom is my role model, honestly. She has given up so much and sacrificed so much for me and my sister. You know, being a single parent to two kids is, looking back now that I'm 30 years old and seeing all the sacrifices that she made, um, it's admirable to see what that woman went through and the sort of things that she did to make sure me and my sister had everything it is that we needed. And she will forever be the biggest, the biggest role model for me and the reason I do what I do. She is the biggest motivation that I have. And, she's always so supportive in everything it is that I do. And I couldn't be more thankful and more blessed to have a mom like her. So shout out to my mom for sure.
I love that one, and I'm sure she's going to have a huge smile and admiration on her face always as you say these things.
Absolutely.
I love that. Do you have any superstitions as a footballer?
Oh, I always have to put my, left everything on first. My left sock, my left shin pad, and my left boot on before my right side. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it started, but that is that is what I do.
That's fair enough, and that's not the first time I've heard of someone having to put something on, say on the left side of their body first before doing their right side. So definitely an
Yeah.
interesting one when it comes to superstitions. I think everyone that I listen to, they're all so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. When I was in college, it was a bit different. I think I used to have to listen to this one song right before I think I pulled up into the changing room, and I don't know why. It was just I had to hear it all the time. But yeah, as I've become a professional, it's really only putting on everything on my left side first, and it does not seem to be changing at all. So I'll stick to it.
I love that.
Yeah,
In your perspective, who is the best player of all time?
men or women.
You can go for both. You can choose one or the other. You could pick however you want to.
I think I'll do for men. For the men, I would have to say, let's go with original Ronaldo.
Good
He's a
choice.
goat. Yeah, he is a goat. I mean, I love Messi. I think Lionel Messi is unbelievable. But in terms of, yeah, I think Ronaldo in a way has paved the way for players like Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and Neymar and Kylian Mbappe. With the way that he goes about things, I think he's the original goat. For women, I'm going to have to say, oh man, I don't really know. Let's go with. Mm, let's just go with Mia Hamm. And here's why I say this. One, she's a Tar Heels, so go Heels. And secondly, she really was the, I think, like the absolute pioneer for women's football in terms of, I mean, she's obviously part of the 99ers, but the legacy that she left behind and the sort of and how she still is quite impactful in women's football today. You hear kids that are still like, in the Alex Morgan generations that still talk about Mia Hamm. So I think the sort of legacy that she's left behind and the sort of role that she has played in women's football from, like the mid 90s up until right now is insane. So she's my goat for sure.
Two top choices, definitely for sure. Who is the greatest defender of all time, then, from your perspective?
Oh man, who is the greatest defender of all time? You know what? He's obviously still currently playing. I love Virgil van Dijk. I really do. The way that that man defends, he's an absolute beast. He had when he had just come to Liverpool from Southampton, I didn't understand the whole rave about him. I didn't because I wasn't the biggest footballer in men's football at all. But watching him actually play in person for the first time, I realized very freaking quickly why he was at the time the most expensive defender in the world. The way that he defends, the way that he really asserts himself, as not only as a player but as a leader, is so powerful that sometimes I look at the way that he plays his game and I try to emulate it to the best of my ability. But also, I'm not 6'4", 6'5", and have a man bun. But I just think the way that he asserts himself as a leader, he's just very powerful. Yeah, but also, I also love Marcelo as well. Because I used to play as a fullback. That was actually one of my actually probably my more natural position. And I would watch this man play and how he used to just start attacking, how he would just go on these mazy runs and his ability at his skill, his feet were unfreaking believable. And a lot of the times you don't see defenders have the ability that he does, honestly. But I would watch him and I would think, one, I know I can't emulate that, so I wouldn't even try. But it was almost mesmerizing watching him do the things that he's capable of doing. So yeah, that 100%.
Top choices.
Yeah.
I love that, and I think it's very interesting to even consider Marcelo. What a player he is, mind, and the fact
Yeah.
that he's still playing is incredible. But what a
Yeah.
player he was during his prime as well. If you could play alongside any player, who would it be? Whether it's retired or current,
Oh,
male or
um,
female?
male or female? Oh man, I don't know. You know what? I'm gonna have to say Brianna Scurry, and the reason being is because growing up in the U.S., where soccer was for you know upper middle to upper class, predominantly a white sport in the US. Seeing someone like Brianna Scurry, a whole different topic of the conversation about representation in sport. It was really cool to see someone that looked like me playing on the world's biggest stage and having the success that she did. I think you can't. I think she really has, kind of paved the way for young Black girls like myself. I look at people like Crystal Dunn, who I did play with at, UNC. Um, you'd have the girls now, Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, and young Black girls, Jaden Shaw, who's a young and up and coming future star for the U.S. Women's National Team. I think a player like Brianna Scurry really paved the way for us, giving her, giving us an opportunity to see someone that looks like us doing the things that she's doing. Even though she's a goalkeeper, and I'm obviously a field player, but still, it didn't matter. Seeing someone like her that looked like me really was really incredible to see. So I would definitely love to have played with her.
I love that. What a great choice this one. I love that sort of perception that you put into it, as well as the insight and how that really relates to you on a personal level as well, which I think is so open as well, in terms of that player of who you could play alongside with, but not only what they meant as a player, but what they represented as well. If you had to
Absolutely.
have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
I would say maybe funny, compassionate, energetic.
Good choices. Definitely, definitely good choices for sure. What does reflection mean to you?
Ooh, reflection to me really means self-awareness. And what I mean by that, I think if you have the ability to reflect and self-reflect more than anything, you're aware of who you are, what you're surrounding, and what's going on around you. And to me, reflection is, I think, also having the opportunity to realize the wonderful things that have occurred and what are to come. But I love that question because I think that's something that I've had the opportunity to do a lot over the last few months is just reflect mostly on my career in terms of the things I've accomplished. Because sometimes I think, I've underachieved. Um, but when I hear people like yourself and even my partner, my mom, tell me, listen, you have accomplished so much, sometimes I think getting that perspective and seeing things from a different lens is great. And it gives me a chance to like kind of reflect on, oh, you know what? I did accomplish this and I did do this and I did do that. And so I think it's having that moment of self-awareness that you have accomplished a lot of things that a lot of people wouldn't do in their lifetime. And it gives you a chance just to kind of I guess uh kind of just, pause for a moment on remembering some of the wonderful things that you've had the opportunity to do.
I think that's so important as well, the way that you frame that and way that comes across. But as you said that, you've made me really want to ask you a question, but I am really considerate of time. And it would be a question of why do you think you've underachieved in your career then, considering that you have achieved quite a lot? And you don't have to answer that, but that is a question which I would love to ask you.
No, and I'll definitely answer it. I think the reason why I've underachieved is because I think looking back at young me and what I wanted to accomplish in my career, I didn't necessarily accomplish it. For me, looking back, if I could, think back to like 5-year-old Satara, thinking about all the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to play in the U.S. Women's National Team. I wanted to play for, in a World Cup and in the Olympics, win both of them. I wanted to be okay. I'll be honest. I wanted to be a little bit famous from, professionals. I wanted to be a professional, soccer player, but like be a well-known professional soccer player. I wanted to have the glitz and the glam that come with it. Um, but I think looking at it from that lens, that's why I think I've underachieved. But the reality, as I look back and I reflect on like what you just mentioned, as I reflect on kind of what it is that I've done, I did something that a lot of people won't ever get the opportunity to do. And I am so thankful that I got to do that because I've been to some incredible places and more importantly, I've met some incredible people. And through those experiences, I have done things in the span of 30 years that people won't do in their lifetime. And sometimes I think when I look at it from that perspective, I'm like, wow, maybe I overachieved because I didn't think I would be able to do any of this. And so, but I think the underachieving comes from things that I so thought I desperately wanted that looking back now, I'm glad I didn't have it because I think it kind of shaped me to be the woman that I am today. And I'm proud of the woman that I am today and the woman that I'm, constantly becoming. So underachieving, I no longer think that. Yeah, there are, sometimes I do have, moments where, you spoke about social media and how it's such a powerful tool. I think one of the downfalls about social media is that it that that constant thing of just comparison. You see people have all of this and you can't help but think, man, if I just had that, I'd be 10% more happy. And I think that's kind of the way that I looked at things, when I was perhaps maybe in my mid-20s. But now that I'm a bit older, and I've had the career that I've had, I've done so much. I've accomplished so much, and I'm so proud of myself. And I would redo my career over and over and over again because young 5-year-old Satara would be super proud of 30-year-old Satara right now. And so I think that's a wonderful accomplishment that I've done.
And I think that's such a wonderful way for you to really frame that and put that together once again, because it is so true. And even just flipping that on a perspective as and something that I was going to mention in the podcast, but we just kept moving on. Everyone that I've had which have come out of the US game, they've had a lot of success. And I think the US national system is set up by there is a lot of female players and again male players as well, but focusing on a female perspective, a lot of players which when you look into their information and background and what they've done at college and university level, they've got an incredible background and CV, especially when you read it. And I think
Right.
what they achieve from social media as well is a great sort of accolade as well, because they know how to set up social media, gives them skills, they get to do their volunteer in the community commitments. But when it comes down to those accolades and the amount of players coming through and those who don't make it, that proportion of that college level to then, success of players coming through is very, very low. And we know this
Yeah.
from a national, a worldwide and national level as well. But I think when you look at the accolades the players have achieved and then they haven't gone on to make it professional, that is quite a big disadvantage to the sport, which I think from a US perspective. But in terms of the amount of players then who have made it as professional, you look at their background at clubs and where they've moved. They might have moved to 6 or 7 different countries. Now they've got an amazing, experience of being in different countries and meeting different people, etc. But for you, you've had such success in having such stability, whereby you have only moved across 3 different countries. You've been in the USA, Norway, and England. You've had a great opportunity of 3 different countries. You've represented the national team. You've had opportunity over nationals. You play for highly level clubs across England. You play for other decent teams, as well as having other opportunities of friendships. You've had personal accolades. So I think the stability which you've had and transition from US to abroad, and as well as having the choice of whether the national team is for you or not, and then having an opportunity to come back and staying injury free so far in your career at the age of 30. I think what a career which is so amazing, where when I speak to some of the other players who've been at 6 or 7 clubs, they'd absolutely take your career time and time again compared to the one that they might have had.
Absolutely, and I think that's such a great way to look at things, most definitely, and, I think it's, like, statistically, like, put out there, the amount of, collegiate players that actually make it professional in their sport, I think it's less than 1%. So the fact that I was able to be in that less than 1%, little group is astonishing, and you're absolutely right, my career could have been a completely different thing. And, you and I will be having probably a completely different conversation. But you're absolutely right. When I look at it and I look at it from other people's perspective, there's so many people that would want to be in my shoes and have done the things that I have. And I think that's what kind of keeps me a bit humbled because, at the end of the day, I'm doing something that a lot of people wish they had the opportunity to do and just never got the opportunity to do it. Or they did, it just got cut quite short. So thank you for allowing me to putting that in perspective because sometimes I think I do forget. And I think it's normal. I think it's normal for us as athletes. We get so caught up on what hasn't happened for us rather than what actually has happened for us. And sometimes, what hasn't happened for us is actually okay, because what has actually happened for us has been 10 times better than what hasn't happened. So um I think getting a chance to look at that from that perspective is humbling and quite frankly, it just puts things in perspective for me that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be and I'm doing something that's incredible and I should be super proud of myself and I am. And I'm going to constantly be proud of myself, and proud of the things that I'm doing and the way that I'm paving for the next generation to come. And for me, that is what matters.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you feel humbled, and I'm glad that you can have that perspective of what has and hasn't happened, but you can actually look back with fondness and happiness in terms of the current
Exactly.
perspective, and then when you do finish, how you're going to feel when you finish at the end of your career, and how happy that you will be because of it. If you could recommend one book, what book would it be?
Oh, I just finished a book from Colleen Hoover is one of my favorite authors. I just read a book called Verity, and it is so good. So everybody go read it. It is a thriller. It is crazy, and I had the best time reading it.
Sounds a great book, and definitely for anyone listening to check that one out and to break your mind away from sport and to have this different opportunity in life to experiencing something different. But on the back of that, then, what is your favorite TV show?
Ooh, I have so many. So Euphoria is one of my favorite TV shows for sure. Abbott Elementary, which you guys don't get out here. It's an American TV show, which obviously all the shows that I'm going to suggest are definitely American. And what else? Yeah, I would say those are. Oh, and Stranger Things, obviously, when it finally decides to freaking come back out. Yeah, so those are, I would say, my top three.
Good choices. And I was speaking to someone in work the other day, and I work in a school myself, just for so you can know. And we were just chatting about their favorite shows and stuff. And then I mentioned a few, such as Ted Lasso, Modern Family, Two and a Half Men, How I Met Your Mother, and all these kinds of other shows. And they're like,
Yeah.
I've never heard of a single one of them. And I'm like, you just don't watch TV.
Yeah, it's definitely America, and that's definitely one thing that I miss about being back home is just getting a chance to watch it. But thankfully, Ted Lasso, not Ted Lasso, Euphoria and Stranger Things, they're on, Euphoria, you guys get it out here, definitely I can watch it. And Stranger Things is on Netflix, is perfect. Abbott Elementary though, it only comes on Hulu, and you guys don't have Hulu out here. So sometimes I have to use my VPN and figure it out to watch it. But other than that, it's good. But I love British TV shows as well. So I'm up all for it. So it's awesome.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. What's your favorite film then?
Oh man, Girls Trip. It's by far my favorite movie. My friends will tell you, like, anytime anytime I have an opportunity to watch it, I'm watching it. It is by far the greatest movie ever.
Good choice for movie for sure. If you could play for any manager, who would it be?
Huh. You know what? I'm gonna have to say Casey Stoney.
Good choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I played with Casey actually. Funny story. I actually played with Casey when I was at Liverpool. And I got on actually very well with her. And yeah, but I've heard nothing but good things about her, with her obviously being a manager when she was, obviously here at United, and then now that she's in San Diego. But everybody that I've spoken to that has had her has always been a biggest like a really good fan of her. So she's a great person. So I just know she'd be a great manager. She just knows the game so well. When she was a player and I, obviously played with her, I learned a thing or two from her. So yeah, I would definitely play for her for sure.
Good choice and very interesting. And the final one I have for you is, what are the three non-negotiables that you have?
Work hard always. Um Never give up on anything. Like, I hate people who just, like, throw in the towel early for something that's an inconvenience to them, like, absolutely not. Um, and what would the third one be? Just be a morally good person. I like people with, that have good morals and, you know, aren't a complete, jerk to everyone. So, yeah, those would definitely be my top 3.
I love those three non-negotiables, and I love the last one for sure. But in terms of being a morally good person, and sometimes when that comes to sport, that can be a very difficult thing to weigh up in between, and
Yeah.
finding that can be difficult to find as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've come across it, quite a few times, and it's sad. It's sad what how some people can honestly be. But yeah, I surround myself with people who kind of have the same mindset and the same values as I do. That just they want to be a good person in this world, and for me, as long as you're trying to be like that, then I have no complaints.
Well, Satara, that wraps up a wonderful episode that I've recorded with you tonight. And the fact that we have gone over, I do really appreciate it. And I am really sorry at the same time. I
No
was watching
worries.
the time tick on as I was watching it. So I was considerate and I wasn't just trying to tick up the minutes for sure. But it's not a conversation that I want to end either, because you've had such a fascinating insight in terms of such a great career. But just the opportunity to discuss the exploration of things that we've really sort of touched upon, which has been so much within this episode. It's truly been amazing, and I really appreciate, as I said, the first half an hour, just as soon as the conversation started, you took it away. So I am so thankful of that, and I wish you the best luck in returning from injury. And I hope everything goes well in terms of back on the pitch, and everything else that you want to achieve goes well. But hopefully, I'll catch you again by the end of the season, considering you're only half an hour away. So it hopefully get to have an in-person meet at some point as well.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on. It was great to, I think, first and foremost, just like reflect and kind of just talk about things that, I've never really been, transparent with things that have gone on in my career. There's certain things that at the surface level, like I've been real with, but I think I've been given the opportunity and the platform, most importantly, to be able to kind of like tell my story, and I'm so grateful for it. I'm thankful for this connection, and and I hope to see that this podcast takes off, and you get a chance to just speak to other people like me that that have a story and just want to be able to tell it in the most transparent and authentic way. But again, thank you so much for having me on. And honestly, I could have spoken to you for like another 3 hours myself, because I feel like we were just kind of getting to like the root of everything. But maybe again sometime very soon, and I will look forward to it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let's do it again. But it'd be great because, as you say, that authenticity and transparency is definitely something which you've shared right throughout. And even though, as in the build that I said, you don't have to share specific details, you've just delved into something which has been so true. So I appreciate that. And it can be so
Absolutely.
hard to do that, but again, it is so thankful. But hopefully, you have a good rest of your night, what's remaining of it, and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Thank you, Luca. I'll speak to you soon.
Yes, thank you very much, Tara.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need three different people in there because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other two, and that's absolutely fine.